Why, hello there. Welcome to the monthly Q&A Patreon, Twitch subscriber, YouTube member, supporter, donor thing, podcast that I do, which is if you support me somewhere on a channel or a platform or like wherever, if you've donated money to me once on Coffee and you had your Discord signed up to that, you can ask me questions in the channel Discord where there's a special little room for questions, and then I'll do a Q&A podcast like this where I answer them. Monthly-ish, because I forget sometimes or I get burned out or whatever, like many things happen. But here's the one for March. And I'm trying something different this time, which is that usually I answer every single question I get. But sometimes I get questions to which I don't have any kind of a useful or interesting answer. So it's like, what do you think of this book? And it's like, oh, well, I've never read the book, so I don't have an opinion. And I kind of feel like that's a little... It always felt a bit like wasting people's time to sort of bring it up and like, oh, this book doesn't get, oh, well, I don't know. Like to sort of read the question and do the thing and then be like, I have no opinion. So this time around, I've edited out those questions and I'm not going to answer them. So if your question doesn't show up here, it's probably because I feel like for whatever reason, I don't really have a good answer to give to that, or maybe it's too private or whatever. And so rather than reject the question in the video, I just sort of don't put it in. You can let me know on if you're a supporter whether you'd prefer for me to read out all the questions and sort of say, hey, no comment to this one, because that's perfectly fine by me. I just thought maybe this will shorten procedures a little bit and make the whole thing more interesting. So that the people who support me can weigh in on whether they would like me to do all of the questions or whether it's fine if I just edit out a few. Speaking of which, let's get started on the actual questions. And the first one is a bit of a one. Want to get this one out of the way right up front, I think, which is Kogato Ergusum. If you don't mind me asking, what's your opinion of Necrit playing Hogwarts Legacy? If that's too touchy a question, what's your favorite art in a card game? And it is a slightly touchy question, I'll say, because my temptation is to give a touchy answer, which is like to be like, yeah, what do you think I think? Which is not fair, because you can't know that unless I say it out loud, and I have been very intentionally not talking about it. So on the promise that nobody goes and tries to start any kind of a Twitter thing or flame war or start being shitty or get into shouting matches with people over this, yeah, no, I'm not a huge fan of him doing that. First of all, because of like the whole situation around Hogwarts Legacy, and also because of the conversations that we had about it. Because we did talk about like when he was sort of gearing up to try it, like he really wanted to do some content about Harry Potter because he's engaged with that universe and he's noticed a lot of lore plot points and like he thinks the lore would be interesting to talk about and talk about, which I completely understand. I was a massive Harry Potter fan for many years myself. And then Hogwarts Legacy is coming out. Hey, that's a good opportunity in the SEO of like that's just part of the business of being a YouTuber, right? You talk about the thing that's current. And he sort of came to me and said, hey, do you think I should do this? Like there's a lot of shouting about a lot of people angry and I don't really understand why. And I tried to explain it to the best of my ability, like without being sort of judgy or shouty or whatever, that hey, this is something that's really emotionally charged. Like this woman is the figurehead of a huge, like really virulently, violently anti-trans movement, and things are getting really fucking ugly, like to the point where it's literally threatening the Union of England and Scotland for a bit. And like there's mounting genocidal politics in the US. It's like it's a big deal because it's a big deal, and I don't think you should do it. Like I told him that multiple times, is I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think you should do it. Like I don't think like playing the game makes you transphobic or whatever, but it's a gesture of support. It's a gesture that says, hey, yeah, you know what, I see you and I care about this too. Which is which is not the same as activism, obviously not. Like it's not like it's a holy thing to not play that one video game. It's a small gesture of support, and I told him that if he does go ahead and make content about Hogwarts Legacy, even in spite of all the people who are like really fucking upset about what this woman is doing to trans people, to a lot of his queer fans, that's gonna feel like it's gonna feel like a rejection. It's gonna feel like a signal that they're not really safe in his community. And what he told me more or less, and I don't want to misinterpret him, but like more or less what I think he took away from it, I don't think he really understood the seriousness of it. And the conclusion he seemed to come to is that, well, it's only really on Twitter that people are going to be yelling at me about it. Like, people on YouTube probably aren't going to care. I'm probably not going to get that much backlash, and so I'm just going to do it. Seems to be the conclusion that he came to. And, like, I was one of his queer fans, you know? So that, hurt. Yeah. That having those conversations and then just being completely fucking ignored, is not pleasant. I don't like that very much. And the sort of mental calculus of like, well, I want to make a video about it, and I'm not gonna get yelled about it enough to not make a video. Not a fan of that. And I've decided that I don't really want to talk to him for a while. And that's as much as I'm gonna say about that. Because again, I don't want to be fucking Keemstar over here. I don't want drama. I don't want people to go yelling at anyone on my behalf, especially. Like, no, don't do that. This is, like, we're adults. We can resolve our differences ourselves, if and when they need to be resolved. So, yeah, no, I'm not a fan of it. I don't especially like the reasoning that he gave. And I don't think it was the right thing to do, especially. Anyway, get that out of the way early. Yazayoran. Any One Piece theories and headcanons that you have? Oof. I mean, that's the thing is, at this point I've had headcanons that just turn out to be confirmed, but like, my headcanon, I guess, is what the One Piece is, right? Because Oda has been pretty clear that the One Piece is a thing. Like, it's not just, oh, the real treasure was the friends we made along the way. It's an actual thing, it's an actual treasure, and I kind of do think at the end of it, there's gonna be a huge-ass motherfucking pile of treasure. I think, this is like something that's a little bit crazy to headcanon as One Piece fans. I think the One Piece is just all of Jolly Roger's gold. Like, I think it really is just all of his treasure. Like, so the whole bunch of shit that he's got, like, and it's not necessarily just gold, but like also all the mementos of his journey and all of the, like, everything he picked up, like pieces from his old ships, like the ships that he went through while he was journeying as pirate, like maybe the prow of his very first vessel, like all the memories and all of the everything he collected, not just the money, but certainly also the money, but also all of the things that mattered to him, the things that meant something to him historically. Because One Piece seems to be very much about that. It seems to be very much about, like, hey, treasure can mean more than just gold, right? Like, something so stupid as a straw hat can be incredibly important and treasured and like, potent as a piece of treasure. This is one of the very first arcs that exist in One Piece, is, like, the establishment of what does the word treasure mean in this universe, and it means gold, absolutely. Gold, jewels, money, moolah, like, absolutely that, but also, like, meaningless things that don't matter to anyone except the person who has a strong emotional attachment to them. So my headcanon is that that's going to be the One Piece. It's going to be Roger's treasure, but it's not just going to be gold and silver. It's also going to be all the things that mean something to him, all of the history that means something to him, because that then thematically would tie into the poneglyphs and the discovery of the Void Century, right? Like that the history of this journey that Roger has been on, like his history, that all the stuff he went through, all the things that happened to him, those are precious things, right? Like, those are precious, valuable, important things that are worth protecting and worth defending. And so it follows that, hey, the history of the world is also a treasure, right? Like, the history of the world, the truth about what happened in the world, the truth about why the world is the way it is, that's also a treasure. The history of what has happened to us, the reasons why the world is the way it is, that is also a treasure. And that's a treasure that's being hoarded away by the world government, who don't want people to know about the Void Century, right? So that's my headcanon, is that it is going to be a huge pile of treasure, but not just gold. It's like, the treasure is also the adventure, like the history of how you came to get the treasure is a part of the treasure. Anyway, Salaman, have you experienced any culture shock? Not in the real world, really. Like, I mean, I've mostly traveled inside of Europe, which is like Italy is a different place, but it's not that different. But then I think I've never really visited places that are like that far outside of the European Union. So no, not really. Like, I've experienced culture shock on websites, on the internet many times, where it's like you enter a particular space, like for a fandom or like some kind of online community that you're not a part of. And just the things that are taken for granted, like the assumed knowledge and like the assumed customs of a place, can be really fucking disorienting. And like the last time I experienced that kind of a culture shock was like I think it was like an anime Discord that I joined briefly. That was just the way that these people talked to and about each other was clearly friendly. Like, they were clearly like clearly this was just a cultural thing of like, this is just how we talk. But it was like, I couldn't parse I couldn't parse the affect of how people talk to each other at all. I couldn't parse the affect of how they responded to one another, how they carried conversations. It was very strange. It was just out. I felt very out of my element there, and I left soon after. Some of it was problematic, obviously. Like, some of it was just like using, bad words that should not be used. But also just the attitude that they all took with each other, like the general default stance that people had towards each other was very weird. Like, everything was sort of an unreal shitpost. Like, everything was filtered through such a profoundly thick layer of irony that nobody ever said anything sincere ever. And if anyone said anything sincere, like, it was just assumed to be a trap to get someone else to engage sincerely so that you can make fun of them. Like, it was a very unpleasant and hostile environment from my perspective. So that was I guess the closest to real life culture shock I've experienced in recent times. My brain is not squid. Thoughts, like, in general, I mean, I try not to. If I had a really bad habit of it. Like, I really sort of had every day I was just thinking all the time, and it was way too much. And my body just kind of couldn't take it. And like it's you start small with like deliberations, right? Like, just a casual deliberation with friends. And then you maybe question something in private every once, like, just for fun, just question something in private for fun. But then, like, before you know it, it's like 9 a.m. and you've been up all night just thinking the whole time, just mainlining thought after thought after thought after thought, and there's never enough. You never get the high out of it that you got the first time, and it's like, you become so desensitized to it, and it's ruining your life. And so you kind of have to cut yourself off. And I manage my thoughts very carefully now. I like never do more than one a week. And only at parties. Only at parties, because otherwise I know it'll just spiral. Isa, how does your perfect day look like? Oh, that's easy. Wake up after getting a decent amount of sleep. Not woken up by anything. I just wake up because my body wants to. And then I eat some food, and I lie on the couch, and I scroll TikTok, and play some video games, and I don't do fuck all that is useful or productive or leads towards any sort of helpful, meaningful conclusion. And doing that doesn't put me behind on anything. Right? Like, I do that and nothing bad happens. Like, no bad negative consequences whatsoever. Order pizza for dinner, do whatever, and then it doesn't put me behind on my work or make me late for something or stress me out about just a day where I don't do fuck all. And it's completely fine, and I don't have to worry about it at all, even a little bit. That is the perfect day. Quinny, let's see. Hey, Scan, when did you hear about Throne and Liberty's upcoming blah blah songs from NC Soft, Blade and Soul? Okay, that's a very long question. But if you're asking me, okay, so you're... Okay, I didn't take the time to parse this question properly, I think, because I thought you were asking me specifically about Blade and Soul or Ion. But no, you're asking me about Throne and Liberty, which the new... No, I have never heard of that. I don't know what it is. I had a thing about NCSoft, though, because, like, the games have amazing lore and are generally poorly managed, but... Yeah, no, I have a few friends who've worked for NCSoft in various capacities, and they don't have anything good to say about working for those companies, so if you're telling me that they're poorly managed... Yeah, no, You know, I believe you. And I think that kind of comes through in games like Blade and Soul, which to me, like, ironically feel a little soulless. I've not engaged with them super deeply, but Blade and Soul is a game that I look at it and I get nothing. Like nothing except surface pretty aesthetics. Nothing else comes through in the game's visual design. Maybe it has deep lore or whatever somewhere in there. I've never looked because I never felt like there was anything to look for. Like the surface aesthetics of the game are just so empty to me. Like they don't hook me with anything. They don't say anything to me. So I've never engaged with it. I thought it was about Blade and Soul, but no, I've never heard of their new thing because I don't really engage with NCSoft's products. What's my opinion on AI voice generation, asks Snake Oil. What an appropriate name for that question. Same as it is with anything AI, is like it's a fun toy, and people have been doing a whole bunch of funny shit with it, like those goddamn president playing video games TikToks that got really popular. I think those are kind of lame, but like, people have done some fun shit with like TF2 characters and like all that kind of stuff. The problem is that eventually it's gonna be like, it's gonna happen that when Mark Hamill dies, they're gonna use that to recreate his voice for the Joker for some fucking Batman movie, and they're gonna do it with Kevin Conroy too. They're gonna do it. Like, they're gonna. And that's the thing that this is gonna be used for, and this is gonna be the same thing with AI art, by the way. It's gonna be used to take the work of people who are dead and go, hey, we've used AI to imagine what it would be like if this beloved artist continued their thing. Like, imagine if Miura had died 20 years later, but still hadn't finished Berserk. Like, if some motherfuckers would have taken AI and be like, hey, we've trained the AI on Berserk, and we've asked it to write the ending, and they're gonna put it out as, like, official part of the series. Like, that's gonna fucking happen. It's gonna happen. At some point, a dead man is going to be used, like, puppeteered like a corpse at Weekend at Bernie's. Dead man, woman, whatever. Like, gonna be puppeteered like a corpse in Weekend at Bernie's in order to sell some utterly soulless horror of a continuation or a finishing or whatever of their iconic work. Like, it's gonna happen. They're gonna do it with James Earl Jones for Darth Vader. They're gonna do it, like, they've already fucking done it with Carrie Fisher, like, with this blessing of her family in that case, but they've already done it, like, recreating dead people for roles that they originated or whatever. Like, they did it with Peter Cushing's in Rogue One, and it's like, and it's not gonna be in the service of anything artistic. It's not gonna be in the service of like, making good art. It's gonna be in the service of, hey, we can put this on a marketing PR blast and send it out to all the outlets to get headlines from it. Like, that's all it's going to be used for. That's all they're going to do with the idea of reviving these people from the dead. So, yeah, I don't mind the toy so much as I mind what capital is going to do with the technology. Let's see, how much, Tragedy Slot asks, how much are you playing through Heavensward to experience the story, and how much are you playing through Heavensward to get to the next line of Hildebrand quests? I'm not gonna lie, it's on my mind. My big special boy is on my mind, and I definitely want to get to it. I have finished Heavensward's story now. Did that on stream a little while back, and I've just sort of been letting the YouTube episodes catch up. So Hildebrand is coming up over the course of the patch content, I'm pretty sure. And I'm excited to see our boy again, to see how far they're going to push the cutscenes in the engine and the animation for the faces. I imagine it's going to be quite delightful. Male Jade, you talked about the church is bad because they won't let us bang dragons meme, and that it was so literal for Heavensward. Are there any other memes you saw about the game that turned out to be true, or memes you suspect to be true? I mean, I don't know that many Final Fantasy XIV. Like, the only reason why I know that Final Fantasy, like, the church won't let us fuck dragons meme applies to Final Fantasy XIV is because I have a friend who sent me that meme. So I'm not really deep into 14 meme culture, but I think the copy pasta meme has turned out to be very true. Like, the thing of, like, what that meme, like, have you heard about the award-winning acclaimed blah blah MMORPG with free content up to level 60? That copy pasta? The truth that is there in that one is that when people, like, people who know that Final Fantasy XIV has something to offer, right? Like that it has like a compelling narrative, that it has like something that's way better than Realm Reborn to play through. They kind of have to pitch it that way, right? Because how the fuck else do you pitch it? Like, if you're gonna tell someone, yeah, you have to sink like 80 hours into it before you get to the good part, then you had damn well better tell them, yeah, but it's free. It's for free, and it comes with a bunch of free stuff. So much free stuff on top, so you don't have to pay any money to get into this thing that I like, that I have a hard time recommending because it's so mediocre for so much of its runtime. So that meme is true. Like, the truth there is that that's the only way to really sell 14 to an audience that's not inclined to believe you when you say that, like, who's not inclined to be sold on the idea that the story gets good after 40 hours. Jesser, you've mentioned about Scandinavian myth and so forth. What are your thoughts on Finnish mythology specifically, or Finnish in general? There are other Baltic myths. There are also other Baltic myths like Estonia. So I don't know much about the myths of the Baltic specifically. Like, I know there's a lot of overlap with like the Germanic myths of Scandinavia and stuff. But for Finland, like, the main piece of Finnish mythology I know is Vanamoinen and the golden. The mill, like the mill that he has that like turns out gold, or what, like that's, and I mostly know that because of the Don Rosa adaptation, or the Don Rosa take on that particular mythology with Scrooge McDuck and the Duck family, and that's sort of the main thing I know about Finnish mythology. Like in Scandinavia, Finland is sort of considered the weird eccentric uncle who lives in the woods and always carries a knife, who's like fine, like you want him on your side in a fight every time, and he's like never a problematic person at all, but also just kind of weird and scary, and we don't really know what to talk about with them. So yeah, like I'm not super deep into Finnish folklore in particular, but I do know Vanamoinen, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing terribly because I cannot pronounce Finnish. Dork Moonblade. Moving away from your critiques regarding AI art being automation, some people have also said that because art is all about communication of meaning between the artist and the audience, AI art cannot actually be art because there's no meaning being communicated. Do you agree? No, I don't agree with that one specifically. Like, this is one thing that where I probably differ from a lot of critics of AI art, is that meaning in art is not a series of direct communications between the artist and the audience. It just isn't. Meaning emerges when the audience engages with the output, and there's this gotcha, right? Like that sort of like traditionalists and people with marble statue profile pictures on Twitter like to pull, which is like, you could go into a modern art gallery, and if you put a Coke can on a pedestal, people would stop and look at it and be like, oh, that's really deep art because it's all fake and phony. And it's like, hang on, turn your brain around there for a second there, buddy. What you've just said is that an ordinary object placed in the right context can communicate meaning to the audience that was never intended. Yeah, that's the whole fucking point of pop art. Like, what do you think Andy Warhol was doing when he painted those fucking soup cans? Like, what do you think Liechtenstein was doing when he ripped off a bunch of actual comic artists in order to place that? Like, what do you think that they were doing? Like, why do you think modern art has a tendency to be so fucking abstract? That is why. That's because that's the magic, man. Is that an object that has no intrinsic meaning whatsoever can be given meaning through the way that the audience interacts with it. That if you are willing to look at something as art, if you are willing to make it art in your mind, it becomes art. That's fucking magic. That's amazing. That is so fucking cool. Like, that's why you have all these, occasionally, this modern artist exhibition, and the artist just hung up a white canvas and called it art. This is so lame. Like, interesting. Do you want to think about that for a second? Like, do you want to engage with it at all? Do you want to engage your mind and think about, okay, so is there any meaning that I can derive from that? Like, regardless of what the artist intended, who gives a shit what the artist intended? Can you derive some meaning from that apparent meaninglessness? Can you divine something from it. Because one of the more famous examples of it, like, is like I saw actually an exhibition of some artworks, like these 4 huge canvases, like huge, that were hung next to each other on the wall, and they were just plain white. Like, as far as I know, it's just plain white squares on a wall, which is fucking meaningless, right? It's just nothing. But then if you actually go close, if you go in close to the painting, rather than standing far away and sort of like trying to take in the whole of it, if you go in close and look, what you find is that it's not just white paint on a white canvas, it is many layers of slightly different tones of white paint, like slightly cream white, slightly gray white, slightly off-white, layered over on top of each other. It has this amazing texture on the surface of the painting, and all these little interplays about these very slightly different shades of white that sort of mingled in and out of each other. It was actually, like, just as a visual experience, if you actually got up close, like within a few inches, and you actually looked at it, it was actually quite interesting, because you realize that, oh shit, my eyes have no fucking idea what white is anymore, because now this looks yellow, and that looks gray, and nothing looks white, because there's all these different shades of barely distinguishable white from one another. That's an interesting aesthetic experience, right? Like at the very least, that is an interesting aesthetic experience. That's, oh, okay, I've never seen that before. I've never experienced my eyes get confused about the color of white before. Like, at least that's novel. But the point of me going off on this entirely different tangent is, like, meaning is created when the audience interacts with the artwork, right? And meaning, like, there's meaning created when the artist creates the artwork. The artist creates a certain amount of meaning and derives a certain amount of meaning from making the artwork. But when the audience interacts with the art, meaning is also created. And if it can be true that painting a bunch of soup cans on a canvas and hanging them in the gallery can turn them into art, as Andy Warhol pretty demonstratively demonstrated, if you can take a urinal like Marcel Duchamp did and put it in a museum and thus turn it into art in the minds of the audience through the magic trick of interpretation, then that's also true for AI art. Like, yes, it is definitely true that if you want AI art to be in its craft reflective of the humanity of the artist, then you're gonna come away disappointed, because, like, there's none of that in there. Like, there's none of the artist's craft in there. Like, there's none of Rembrandt, like, with his thick, meaty brush strokes and the way that he used the texture of oil paint so specifically to sort of communicate his vibe and his feelings. There's none of that in there. But the idea that you can't derive meaning from AI art, I think, is nonsense. And this is something I remember a little bit fondly, actually, about the early days of AI art, which are not so very long ago, but back when these algorithms were still in their infancy, where they hadn't had that much training data and that much correction. I need to blow my nose. They created these fucked up weird dreamscapes, right? Like, because, like, I remember one was called Secret Horses. Like, well, the prompt was Secret Horses, and it created this wildly colorful dreamscape with these ghostly, strange, shadowy, almost like blankets floating in the air, vaguely in the shape of horses in this utterly bizarre acid trip of a meadow. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, that, like, how do these words, how does that prompt filter through an imperfect algorithm? Like, that created some really interesting visuals, some really interesting visual results that the audience easily can engage with and derive meaning from, right? And if anything, as AI art has gotten better, air quotes, like, as it has gotten much better at the things that AI art promoters want it to be good at, which is they want it, like, because the people who make these AI art algorithms, like the people who promulgate them, the people who develop them, and the people who evangelize for them, they don't actually want AI art to be communicative. They don't want it to be meaningful. They want it to produce specific, saleable products. And that's been very, very clear with the way that these algorithms have been used, is that what we want is, we want a, like, program where I can say anime waifu big titties, and it will produce a picture of anime waifu big titties exactly like all the other pictures of anime waifu with big titties out there on the internet. Like, right, like, it'll produce a really highly rendered, high quality, like, high production value piece of art to my specifications. It will, like, if I say photo of like ex-politician doing an immoral thing, I want a photorealistic, indistinguishable from reality photo of the politician, like, doing coke off a stripper's tits or whatever, right? Like, that's what they want. They want that very specific product, and they want not realism necessarily, but they want that specificity, right? Like, they want that thing of, like, you tell it to draw you a picture of a pipe, and it will draw you a exact realistic picture of a pipe. You tell it to do it as a line drawing, it will do it as a line drawing. We don't want the computer or the algorithm, like, we don't want the computer to have any effect, any intermediary or mediating effect on what the art is going to be, right? Like, we don't want the computer to interject its artificial limitations into the process, which is what they used to do, right? Like, what they used to do, because they didn't have a perfect data set, because they weren't so highly trained, is that the computer introduced a layer of, essentially, of interpretive meaning of its own, right? Like, it through the randomizations that it did, through the weirdness that it created, through the surrealism that it injected into it, it injected it with a certain aesthetic and a certain interesting layer of meaning that sort of applies to the way that human intention is filtered through, like, these mediating tools, like because that's something that's true of, like, a paintbrush, right? So many artists, especially like so many painters, have spent so fucking long trying to get oil paint to look real, right? Like, trying to get oil paint to depict real objects and real people, and, like, striving for that attempt to reach a realism, but always being stymied and limited by their tools. Right, like, the limitations of the tool have always been a site of meaning, in terms of how art is created. Like, the limitations of the tools are what create the aesthetics of cave paintings, for example. They look the way they do because, well, these people didn't have that many pigments to work with. Like, they had ochre, they had dirt, they had like they could deposit, like, rock and stuff, like, but they didn't have, like, ultramarine blue in their arsenal. So cave paintings look the way they do because those were the colors, those were the tools that they had access to, so that mediated what their expression could be. And AI art promoters and the people who make these things don't want AI art to do that. They don't want it to interject between you having a prompt and putting it down and getting a product out that is a perfect one-to-one reflection of that prompt as it would look like if you commissioned a human to do it as generically as possible, right? Like, AI art as it is now wants to be as generic as possible. What the fuck was I talking about? I went off on a whole thing here. Right, meaning. The communication of meaning, right? Like, I think there's less and less and less meaning in it because the product is so standardized, because it is so, like, show me a picture of this specific thing and it will do that specific thing, and the computer won't do anything else. It will only give you exactly what you asked for in, like, whatever form is statistically most likely to be most agreeable to most people, right? Like, it regresses aggressively towards the mean. It regresses aggressively towards the average. It defaults to the lowest common denominator with psychotic precision. And that sucks. That's not very interesting, and that leads to pretty uninteresting artwork. But to circle around to the point I think I was actually trying to get to, it's a little bit late here. There can be meaning derived from a piece of AI art by an audience. As we've seen this happen many, many times already, lots of people have seen artwork, mistaken it. Like, even though it was AI artwork, they mistook it for human-created artwork, and thus they injected it with the meaning that comes from interacting with human-created artwork. That experience is still real, right? Like, even though it's AI art, and it doesn't have that human craft imbued into it, if you see it, and you engage with it, and you derive meaning from it, then that meaning is there, regardless of the circumstances of the production. But I think it is true that it is definitely much less of a human-to-human communication, and more that the work prompts reactions from within ourselves, right? Like, it's a more solipsistic form of art. It's a form of art where your engagement is more lonely, because it's mostly an engagement between you and the piece, and not so much that direct connection that you get to a person when you observe their craft. Is the answer I was trying to get around to. Jesus, that went off in a few directions. OwO. I personally got into a passionate, artistically motivated video game through a series of successive artistic shocks over the course of a year. BioShock, Dishonored, and Dark Souls do that to a young mind. Have you had a similar formative discoveries that made you look at video games in a new, more profound light? Journey. The original Journey on PS3 is by far the most emotionally affecting experience I have ever had with a video game, ever. Because the way the game works is that you go on a journey, you go from being in the desert, then you go to the top of the mountain, and it's sort of a journey through life, and it's like you kind of die as you ascend up to the mountain, and it's like then you respawn back down at the bottom of the mountain. It's like, okay, it's like the hero's journey. It's like a reincarnation cycle. It's like samsara. It's all of that stuff, right? That's not what made it meaningful to me, though. What's meaningful is that in Journey you can run into other players, like just one at a time. You'll like run into someone else who you can't really communicate. There's no voice chat, there's no text chat, there's no anything, but you can run around together and you can go on the journey together. And I did that with someone. And the end of the game, and I won't spoil exactly the way, like there's a specific way the final part of the game plays out. That was one of the most wildly connecting experiences I've ever had with someone that I could not talk to and who I will never interact with again in my life. Yeah, no, that game fucked me up a little bit. That changed me emotionally. Ooh, here's another long one. Hello, Sky and Matrix DX. Two things. First, regarding the idea you mentioned in the last queue of making videos, reviewing other YouTube channels you like. I feel like the best way to even attempt those videos and have the least amount of risk of incidental dogpiling from the fans of said YouTube channels would be to directly talk with the people that run those channels and get their blessing. And that feels like way too much of a process, so as much as I would like to see those videos, I think they're probably too much of a bother to make. I mean, yeah, I've been through these considerations myself already, and besides the fact that getting a hold of YouTubers for anything is fucking impossible, like, we are, as a group of people, not great at answering our emails, and also we get so many emails from people who want our attention about 100 million things that is, like, impossible to answer all of them. So, like, contacting someone directly about something like that is tough. And also, you shouldn't have to do that in order to make a video criticizing or discussing something. So, like, I've been through that talk with myself already, don't you worry. Second, I wanted to ask that since your opinion is Snom is the funniest Pokemon, which one has the biggest bastard affectionate design? Oh, Haunter. No, not Haunter. Gengar. The final form. Gengar does. That's a bastard affectionate character design. The most one. Because of the way, like, it's round, it's spiky, it has that big Cheshire Cat grin in the red eyes. Yeah, no, Haunter. 100% Haunter. Mirrors, has Pizza Tower been on your radar of late? The cartoonishly exaggerated animation is such a treat to watch. Yes. And I have some opinions on it that I might put in a video at some point or another as part of a slightly different subject. And it's definitely a charming game. It's very charming. It's very fun to look at. It's very well put together. It's extremely compelling as a mechanical experience. And I hate playing it. I hate it. I don't like it. I find it intensely unpleasant to play. And that's nothing to do with the art style or any of the quality of the game. It's just that it's a kind of gaming experience that I just don't enjoy at all, even a little bit. Like, no, I don't like playing it. I find its mechanics and its energy and the way that the game plays just intensely unpleasant to engage with. So I've played it for 2 hours, and then I couldn't anymore. Like, because there's a certain manic, stress-induced flow state to it that I completely understand why that's something that really fucking hooks people. But I can't. I cannot stand it. I just can't. It's just not a game for me. Like, it's just not for me at all, is the thing. And so it's not really on my radar in that sense. But the aesthetics are. A question I had is, you've discussed your political and economic views before in the Boss of Science series, and you've talked about a significant component of it comprising of Marxian analysis, but you've also discussed the issues with hierarchy onto itself, and I wanted to ask you if you were aware of anarchist points of views and what your opinions of them were. Yeah, no, I mean, if I have to sum up my politics, they are that people have the right to live without having the threat of starving or being homeless or dying of preventable illness held over their heads to make someone money. As a threat, like to beat them into performing productive labor so someone can make money. Like those are my politics boiled down very, very deep into a nutshell, is that like people have the right to exist in the world, and they shouldn't have to pay for the privilege of doing that. That's it on a very basic level. Everything else about that is like I've never read Das Kapital. Like I probably should someday, but it's, every time I try to start it, it's so intensely fucking boring because it's an economics textbook. I haven't read a bunch of theory. I'm not really well read in theory. I'm not well read in Marxian theory. I'm not well read in anarchist theory. I don't have a label that I like sort of slap on myself where it's like, oh yes, I am a like Kropotkin anarchist or whatever. I don't really have that. What I have are my values, which is like I want people to just live and have a nice time and experience a minimum of suffering, please. And that it is a good when we do stuff to reduce suffering, regardless of whether it benefits us. And so because of that, I find capitalism fucking abhorrent, because it is a philosophy whose entire animating principle is that there is no value except monetary value, and that all human activity everywhere always should be bent towards the acquisition of further monetary value. And I find that inhuman and abhorrent, but I don't have a strong sort of like, yes, I have this theorist who is in the Marxian camp has a very compelling... I don't really know enough about the philosophy. I don't know enough about the theory to really comment. Like, I think the anarchists have a good critique of Marxism in that, yeah, it's nice to sort of say we'll have a dictatorship of the workers and then we'll transition to a classless, stateless society, but how are you going to address inequities in power? Like, how are you going to address the inherent imbalance and injustice that arises when some people are necessarily imbued with power over others, which they can and historically speaking will abuse. Like the criticisms of hierarchy, the criticisms of the state that anarchists have, the ones that I know about, which is not remotely all of them, I think they make sense. I'm also of the view that like I don't really know that there is a way to organize society in a way that doesn't create a power structure. Like maybe there's a super smart based anarchist somewhere who has the perfect answer to that could be implemented at any time if we all just went out tomorrow and did the revolution. But I don't know of a way to organize society that doesn't have a power structure, where one won't just necessarily emerge, because that's just kind of how people organize together fundamentally. Like it's like it's a math problem, essentially. Like it's a thing of like, it's a systemic problem. Like you put people together and you try to get them to organize to do anything. Like you try to get 10 people together to design on a lunch order, and a power structure will emerge. So I don't know that like, so I think like anarchists have a good critique of Marxism and of socialism and of communism. But I don't know that I've seen them provide a better answer. But again, I don't know a lot about theory. Like, I don't have a strong hot take about, yes, this is the specific strain of anarchism that is good, or this is the version of communism that's going to say, I don't have that. I just want people to stop starving. I just want trans people to have the health care that they deserve. I just want there to no longer be children who are homeless and starving. Those are my politics. Snake Oil, have you or are you ever going to play Killer 7? I have only ever engaged with Killer 7 as a Let's Play. And that was some years ago, so I've kind of forgotten most of what happens in it, but because of that, I don't really have any need to go and try and play it for myself. It's also like, in terms of like, it's not something I feel like I do for fun for myself. Like, it would be novel, but I don't know that I do it like as a entertainment experience. And I don't know that I would want to do it for content because I don't think there's any views in that. Which is, this is a job, and I don't think this would make sense to do as a job thing. So probably not. Like, I don't know, maybe if I have a big hole in my schedule one day and nothing else to fill it with, but, we know that's not gonna happen. Miggy likes Sicky. What are some foods you like that maybe people haven't heard of? Shit, I don't know. Because, like, I don't think that Denmark really has any, like, intensely regional specific delicacies that you can't find anywhere else in the world, like smørrebrød, I guess, but that's just sandwiches. Like, that's just open-faced sandwiches with a bunch of stuff on, like a bunch of stuff that probably an American wouldn't put on their sandwich, but it's just a bunch of stuff like herring and like citrus, and like the new Nordic kitchen is doing all kinds of fucked up weird shit, just going out collecting mussels from the shoreline and throwing them on there. But some foods that I like that people haven't heard of, I don't know. Yankee bars? Like anything from Tums, I guess, which is a Danish chocolate company specifically, and they make some Tums chokoladefrøer, like the chocolate frogs that they do. I quite like those, and I don't think they really exist that much outside of like Northern Europe. So I guess those. Mass 8705. Random Pokemon questions. I've seen this pop up in a couple of Pokemon design videos. Will Annihilape's analysis be pushed to when you explore Gen 9? Yes. Scarlet and Violet came out almost a year after the Mankey Sucks short. So yeah, it gets passed over. And if I do Annihilate, it'll be by the time I get to Gen 9, which will be in a million years. Or maybe I'll just fucking decide to rent. Like, it sort of depends. Like, I'm sort of seeing where the Pokemon series goes. And I might just decide to start doing Gen 9 in between other stuff. Like, because I'm going to run out of Dark Souls and Bloodborne soon. I'm going to finish with all of the characters that I wanted to talk about for those. And those series are going to stop. And that's part of why I started up the One Piece shorts, because they're sort of meant to take over some of the time slots. They haven't been doing as well as I hoped. So I don't think they can take over that slot all on their own. I might need something else to put in there. And maybe, I don't really know what that is yet. I think it's probably going to be anime things. Like, I think it's going to be character design things of specifically of anime characters. Something like that. But maybe I'll throw in some fucking Gen 9 reviews while I'm at it, since by the time I get to Gen 9 in the timeline order, in the Dex order, I can probably justify revisiting all of them. It'll probably be Gen 12 by that point. So I probably won't. But no, yeah, I've thought about it, like, maybe if I wanted to, because that's current, right? Like, the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet is the most recent one. Maybe some Pokemon Arceus hot takes, that kind of thing. That's the most recent stuff, and that's the stuff that does the best in the algorithm. So I thought about that, but no, there's no plans for it right at the moment. It's just stuff I've been thinking about with the shorts. Coco Diagrasum, in your AR art video, you mentioned you studied history. What's a fun niche history fact that you've learned that you wish more people would know? Oh, here's a good one. Cleopatra was born closer to the invention of Bitcoin than she was to the building of the Great Pyramids. And in ancient Egypt, like that, the country, like the place in the time that we think of as ancient Egypt, air quote, they had archaeologists doing archaeology on ancient Egyptian sites. Like, they had people excavating old tombs. They had people delving into old constructions and doing archaeology on ancient Egyptian architecture in ancient Egypt. Because by the time we get to, like, the time of the latter-day pharaohs, that shit had been there for, like, 3,000 years already. Like, that shit had been there for thousands of years already, and they could do archaeology on their own history 2,000 years ago. And they did. Which is, to me, is a neat history fact, because it sort of illuminates that history is so much longer than we feel like it is. And that which is, like, we think of the ancient history times now as essentially anything that's over like 1,000 years old, right? Anything before the year 1000, like we'll sort of concede, yeah, Iron Age, I guess, but it's ancient, right? Like, and anything that hovers around the year 0 is sort of where we lump everything together and, oh, that's ancient history, right? Like that's ancient history, and that means everything from ancient Egypt to like Imperial China, to, like, we sort of just shove all of that into a mush. But the fact of the matter is that by the time of that which we consider ancient Egypt, there was already an ancient, even ancienter Egypt, an even more ancient precursor culture that they themselves were studying from with the same lens, with the same sort of perspective as we do now when we study ancient cultures, air quotes. Like, history is long, and it goes in circles. So, like, I like that fact a lot, because it sort of connects us with history. It sort of shows us that the past is not so much of a foreign country as we think it is. Let's see, Salaman. I know that the 90s and early 2000s existed, but the perspective that I have of it is mostly through the media that was created for the teenagers of the era and the stories that I know are mostly Central Americans. The question would be, how was the transition from the 90s to the 2000s? You're gonna make me feel fucking old, my dude. I was born at the tail end of the 80s. What was it like? Can you imagine a world before the internet? Can you imagine what it was like before you could do internet at all? Before you had that ability? Do you know what that was like? Before the invention of Facebook, even. Like, what was the world like before the invention of social media? What was the world like before? Like, I remember a time when if you wanted to go on the internet, you had to tell everybody else in the house, hey, you can't make any phone calls right now, because I am using the phone line to go online and sit on a website for like 2 minutes while a low-resolution anime picture loads. And hopefully it's got some tits on it, but I can't know. There used to be pranks that you could pull on people, where you say, oh, I found this, like, porn or this picture of something, whatever. And you could send that to them, and then it would be very slowly, a JPEG that loads very slowly, like line by line. And then right before it gets to the cleavage bit, right, like right before it gets to the breasts, the stuff that you're there to see, kind of, then it's all of a sudden it loads much more quickly, and it loads like a picture of a duck or like some complete, and that was a joke that could only exist because data transfer rates were so low. But no, you asked about what was the transition like. The transition was fucking weird, because you must remember also that the transition from the 90s to the 2000s is profoundly shaped and marked by 9/11. In all of the Western world. Like, mostly in America, much more so than in Europe. Like, for us, it was something we just, oh yeah, some plane hit some building in the United States, who cares? But then the Iraq and the Afghanistan wars happened. And then, like, our family members also saw themselves sent to, like, conflicts in a foreign battle zone that lasted for decades and traumatized hundreds of thousands of people and killed 500,000 Iraqis, like millions of Iraqis probably. I don't actually know the fucking death count at this point. For no good fucking reason whatsoever, except that some fucking Americans wanted access to some fucking oil. And that's, you kind of can't disentangle the transition from the 90s to the 2000s from that, because the 90s, and this is hard to remember, the 90s were optimistic, my dude. Like, fucking hell, culture was happy. Culture was so happy. And so optimistic, and so bright-eyed, and so looking towards the future, and so intent on the 2000s. Like, this new millennium in human history was gonna be such a transition to the future. Like, this was gonna be the time of the future when all the promises are gonna be fulfilled. And I was too young to sort of really understand that at the time, but I remember the energy. Like, I remember that the 90s was such a hopeful time. It was such a time of thinking that everything was gonna be alright, because you were emerging out from under the shadow of the Cold War. Like, the Soviet Union had fallen, and there was no longer going to be a thermonuclear exchange at the drop of a hat because some president sneezed the wrong way or whatever that kills us all. Like, it was, as Francis Fukuyama so famously said, the end of history, right? Like, it felt like there was such a sense of relief in the air, such a sense of optimism. And 2001 brought that crashing down. Like, absolutely tumbling the fuck down. The beginning of the Forever Wars. Like, all of that just... Boof! crashing into the ground like the two towers falling over on 9/11. And I don't use that metaphor lightly. Like, that's when the towers came down, so came the optimism of the 90s. And like, so I remember like the rise of nu metal. I remember the rise of emo and Linkin Park and My Chemical Romance. And I remember the culture war that existed between the people who were trying to hold on to the optimism of the 90s and the people who started to fall into the jaded, disaffected nihilism of the 2000s. I remember the beginning of South Park. Like when that came on, when that was a huge subversive underground thing, rather than the sort of very mainstream two rich white people whining about shit that annoys them show that it is now, but where it was instead a couple of disaffected, angry, irony-poisoned teenagers just shouting at the world, and like sort of trying to proclaim their self-hate, essentially, is what South Park was. An exercise in self-hate once upon a time. It was jarring in hindsight. Like, as a kid, I was mostly concerned with what I was going to do at school today, and whether I got to play, whether I managed to get my hands on a PS1, which I never did. But I did manage to get my hands on a PS2. Like, that was the stuff that mattered to me. But what I remember is a sense of almost euphoric, joyous optimism in the time right up until New Year's of 2000, especially. Like the dawn of the new millennium. I remember a euphoric optimism at that time, like a wild public orgy in some ways of hope, of presumption of good things to come, that vanished as the 2000s hit. Like, just vanished, like just popped out of existence. And sort of led in, and this is also again filtered through my experience, because like I became a teenager in the 2000s, right? And when you become a teenager, like, things get emotionally a lot more fraught. And I remember the 2000s as an era of anxiety, a lot of anxiety, a lot of freaking out and worrying, a lot of like things becoming concerning all over again. And then 2008 hits, the financial crash, and you know, things go from shit to worse as we head into the 2010s. But no, yeah, like it was a jarring shift from the euphoria of the end of the Cold War into the beginning of the Forever Wars, because it turns out America needs a global political enemy to direct its imperial violence towards. And since the Soviet Union wasn't going to do it anymore, well, we had to invent a new enemy to fight, and it turned out to be eeny, meeny, miny, mo, Islam. Let's see, Matrox. One dumb question and two serious ones. UwU or wool? Or wool? Fucking neither if I have to, but I would rather go UwU than OwO, because I am not about to nuzzle anyone's bulge. That's not my vibe, and if I must, I'd rather be cute. Have you read Loveless? No. I have not read Loveless, so that's one of those I put right. But the other one, is there anything Riot can do to League that would make you actively play it again, or is it just a well too toxic to ring from? It's actually not the toxicity that does it for me. It's not that solo queue is toxic, or like that normals are toxic and people are tryhards and people yell shit at each other in chat. Because I never, ever, ever have chat on. If, like, even back when I was playing League, I turned all chat off immediately. That was the first thing I did every game. So that's not it. Well, the thing about League is especially as I've gotten older, I'm just not a competitive player. I am just not. I don't care about competition that much in video games. I don't care about beating the other guy. I don't care about like outsmarting, outplanning, outwitting, outmechanicking an opponent that much. It's just not motivating for me. I'm just not that kind of person. So if for me to play League of Legends specifically again, what it would need is game modes. Like if like another Star Guardian game mode, another Odyssey game mode. Yeah, no, I'd jump in. I'd jump in for that. Like, that would draw me back in. But this is something I know from game designer friends, is like when Riot says that League of Legends as an engine, as a piece of tech, just isn't good for delivering single-player experiences, they're not wrong. Like when they publish those graphs of like, yeah, people play the game modes for a bit and then they go back to League normals, they're not wrong. Like that is what happens. It's also a bit of confirmation bias on their side, which is like, yeah, no shit they do. They're all League players. Like, the player base of League of Legends are all people who were attracted to League of Legends. They're all people who were attracted to the competitive gameplay of League of Legends, right? Like, they're all people who want to play that type of game and who feel fulfillment from playing that type of game. Whereas the people who enjoy sort of single-player roguelite experiences or like sort of scenario experiences like the Odyssey game mode or the Star Guardian play, that's a very different player base, and I don't think that many of them would be naturally inclined to play League of Legends. Like, I don't think there's that much of an overlap between the people who would get really into Star Guardian's game mode versus the people who get really into League of Legends. So, like, a big part of the reason why it falls off is also just because, like, League of Legends doesn't have the audience that's interested in that. And if you wanted to build that audience, what you would have to do is provide them with long-term support. Like what Riot would need to do is, like, decide that they care about retaining the business of people who like to play single-player shit, like who like to play cooperative single-player PvE stuff. But they don't want to sink all of the resources into doing that. I can't blame them for that necessarily, but it's like, I have been a little annoyed with the way Riot frames it. It's like, oh, there's just no interest in these these PvE game modes. Yes, there is. Yes, there fucking is. There is. It's just you don't have those players yet. Like, there's a player base there that you could grab if you wanted to sink the resources into try and do it. But I understand why they don't. And that's sort of the reason why I don't feel any compunction really to go back and play much League. Is because I'm not competitive. I don't care about winning that much. I don't care about beating the other guy, which is why I play support. Like, which is why that was my role for a long time. Is like, I'm much more interested in facilitating, like, helping other people to win. That's much more fulfilling and fun for me, the cooperative aspect of it, right? So if League could do something that has more of a cooperative bent rather than a competitive, like, sure, maybe I'd jump back in for that, but yeah, I mean, I'll never say never, because I have had the thought in my head that it might be funny to go back and play League of Legends after, like, 6 years of not touching the game. Maybe that would be fun for content, so who knows? But no, as for my own sake, for my own fun, I'm just not interested in playing League of Legends because it's a competitive experience, and I am not competitive. Same reason I don't play Valorant, same reason I never could engage with Overwatch. Ember Osha, if you could remake a video game from your past and give it a visual update, what would you, if so, what would it be? I want Ring of Red. Ring of Red. Ring of Red. Ring of Red. It's the game that I want is Ring of Red. Ring of Red. Capcom, do it. Please, for the love of God. You've been doing so many good remakes. Please. No, fuck, it's not Capcom. It's Konami, isn't it? Fuck, we're fucked. No, never mind. It's never going to happen. But Ring of Red. I want Ring of Red. I want big World War II era diesel punk mechs punching each other in the battleground of a fictional history where Japan was invaded by the Soviet Union and the United States and split in two like Vietnam and Korea, and has a border conflict over nuclear weapons using steampunk, like, not steampunk, diesel punk 1960s Cold War era mechs. I want that. I want it, Konami. Fuck you. Sell it to Capcom. They know how to do remakes. Fuck you. Sell it. Give that. I want Ring of Red. Counter to the last question, if you could demake a game from the present, what would it be? Ooh, Final Fantasy XVI. And specifically, I would demake it as a PS1 era Final Fantasy game. Like Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, with the pre-rendered backgrounds. That's what I want that. Maybe not, no, actually not 16. Probably not 16, 15 makes more sense. 15 would make more sense. Like, that's, yes. And arguably 15 is not so much a present Final Fantasy game anymore. But no, that would be the kind of thing that I would do. 13 maybe also, but like pre-rendered, like static backgrounds, characters running through them, like you get into turn-based battles, like with the transition to a battle screen. That's what I'd do. OwO, you've dabbled quite a bit in writing in an increasingly artistic and narratively complex way for your What's the Deal videos or your fanfictions. Have you considered exploring aromanticism through this medium of writing stories? No. I think the thing about being aromantic is, like, I don't think there's much to explore. Like, I don't have feelings about being aromantic in a way that I think makes for compelling narrative. Because to me, it's just not, like, it's like asking a colorblind person, like, have you ever thought about writing a novel about what it's like to not see the color red? And it's like, no, because I just don't see that color, right? Like, it's like, you've never been skydiving. Have you considered writing a story about what it's like to never having been skydiving? And I don't really know what to do with that prompt. Exploring aromanticism is like, I just don't have a relationship to it where it's, at least not right now. Maybe that'll change at some later point in life. But right now, I just don't feel like I have a, like, what story would you tell about that wouldn't just be a normal story about a normal person? I don't know what the narrative would be of, like, a story exploring being aromantic. There's not that much to explore. You just don't fall in love with people. You know, you just don't do romance. It's really hard to write from the perspective of, like, what it's like to experience the absence of something. Because it's like, because the whole point is you don't really experience the absence, right? Like, it's not like, oh, there's a void in my soul where romance was supposed to go and it feels empty all the time. Like, no, there is nothing there. It doesn't feel like anything. It's just that whatever thing that happens that turns people into raving lunatics, with, like, brain chemicals boiling all of their neurons and, like, heart palpitations and butterflies in the stomach and stupid grins on their face when they go, I'm in love. Like, that's just a thing that does not happen to me, and I don't know how to frame a story around that. It would be a story about, like, if I get the only thing I could think to write a story about would be how other people treat it, how other people react to it, like the experience of constantly being called, like, of, like, people sort of looking at you as though you're broken, or if you're a guy going, oh, aromantic, yeah, just say you have commitment issues and admit it, like that shit. I guess would be the closest I could come to, but no, I don't think there's a story in that, at least not one that I can write. Hello, Skyen, says Vahendra. Do you intend to play Wolong Fallen Dynasty? No. But also, do you have any opinions on the designs in Subnautica? They're fucking terrifying. No, I have played Subnautica for a bit, and I get out of the shallows, and then you're in the deep water, like, really deep, and then you turn around and there's something moving. No, I'm going back to the shallows, and I'm never fucking, like, fuck the rocket. I am not getting off this planet. No. Nope. Absolutely not. And Barosia, second question. I was rewatching Dark Souls Revisited, but in the first playthrough, you said you had an idea for a speed run that you could do. My actual question is, do you have any plans on doing that? And if so, what would that look like? No, I don't want to spoil it, because it's, well, that's the thing, is, like, I'm sitting here being all coy as though I have plans to do it. I don't have plans to do it because it's a huge time commitment, that I don't have time to commit to. Like, I have so much other shit I need to get through to. I don't have the time to commit to it, but I do have an idea for a speedrun category that I could invent for myself, is solely so that I could hold the world record in a category that only I run, because I invented it and no one else runs it. And I'm sitting here like, I don't want to tell them because that's a spoiler, and I don't want to, as though I'm giving anything away. It would be a lore speedrun, lore percent Dark Souls, which would be an altered version of an all bosses run, but before you can kill the boss, you have to deliver a summary of what their lore is, like why they are the way they are, right? Like what like they're demon, like the Asylum demon is a demon. He was spawned from the bed of chaos. Like, he's probably there, as a guard for not Vendrick, for King Gwyn, to sort of abuse and keep the undead contained, because he's the asylum demon. Like, he's probably being used as a thing to, like, or maybe he's a wandering. Like, just, you have to do a quick summary of what the boss's deal is and who they are and what they do before you move on to the other thing. Like, when you get to Anor Londo, you have to do a quick summary of what is Anor Londo, why does it look like that, what's going on here, and then you have to do an all bosses run where you explain what their deal is before you can kill them, and then that's it. Like, that would be that's sort of the idea I have for a speedrun category that I could do, that I think I would find interesting. Because, of course, like, I'm not a competitive gamer, I'm also not much of a speedrun gamer. Like, I'm not really much into sort of grinding to optimize times and shit like that. I would need something else to engage me while I try to optimize times, right? Like, so coming up with a script or, like, a set of facts that you sort of have to work into a delivery while you're trying to do something as fast as possible, that might be mechanically fun enough for me to do to make me actually grind it out and try and get, like, a moderately respectable time doing it. Like, that to me seemed like it might be fun. Is an idea that I've had circulating in my brain forever. But again, am I ever going to have time to do that? Am I ever going to have the time to sink into actually trying to do that for real? Probably not. So, you know, it's goes on the pile of a million fun ideas. I like the idea I have for my goddamn podcast that I definitely want to start this year. But is it actually going to happen? I mean, I'm doing this as a podcast, but, you know, like a thing for content and not just for my supporters. Sammy, what's your opinion on Taylor Swift's music? What would be your favorite songs or albums? Mostly, I don't find Taylor Swift's discography very compelling. Like, it's not really music for me. It's like a lot of her early music is music for teenage girls, which is good and cool, and also, like, great that she did that. But it's on subject matters and, like, with like emotional standpoints and stuff like that I just don't find relatable. I'm not much of a country fan either. As she moves into her pop era, like, I'm not super familiar with it, but, like, there is, like, the sort of early 20s, like, shit, like, what I think was Red, the album was called, where there was, like, some bops on it. Like, there were some melodies that are, like, cool, and I still sort of whistle them every once in a while, like, we are never, ever, ever getting back together. Like, that's just stuff that, like, was on the radio and I heard it, and, like, that wormed its way into my brain. There's all the memes about, like, I knew you were trouble when you walked in, with the screaming goat shit. But I never engaged with any of that. I don't think I engaged with Swift's music really as music until 1989, which was sort of her attempt to do a much more serious pop album kind of thing. And that was sort of the moment where I felt like, oh, okay, like, maybe, oh, shit. That was the moment when I felt like, oh, maybe she has something to say, like, something to give that I would be interested in. And then I sort of, like, paid attention to what she put out next, and I don't think I got really wasn't really interested in Evermore that much. I found it a little bit too sort of a little bit too dragging and not too that interesting. But there is a song on Folklore, The Last Great American Dynasty, that kind of kicked me off my feet the first time I heard it. Specifically because of the way that Swift, like, she tells the story about Holiday House, right? Like, and the Standard Oil name, and, like, the American dynasty that sort of ended with her when she married into it, and the eccentric shit she got up to, and then the fucking bomb that she drops at the very end of it when she says, like, oh yeah, like, there goes the last great American dynasty. I bought the house. I bought Holiday House. I am the last great American dynasty, and all these people are talking about me, saying, oh, there goes the last great American dynasty. And, like, they are talking about me the way that they talk about her. Like, they talked about the Rebecca, the heir to the Standard Oil name, and sort of placing herself in that historical context. It's so arrogant. It's so arrogant and masturbatory and self-regarding, but it's also kind of breathtaking in that arrogance, because it's not like she's completely wrong about that. Like, it's not like she's completely wrong to locate herself in that tradition. Like, she has a lot of songs about the ways in which she is talked about relative to the way that men would be talked about in a similar position. the way that women are considered and discussed in her industry and as objects of cultural fascination, which also sort of seems to be the impetus for her whole Bad Blood era thing with all the feuds and all of the of the old Taylor's dead bullshit. Like that sort of seems to be what she was processing at that point, is the way that the way that she gets treated relative to someone like Drake, for example, relative to the way that he gets treated in the media and the way that his relationships get commented on and sort of exploited for money. Versus her, and that's also kind of what leads into I didn't really find Midnights that compelling as an album, but I will say that the line from Antihero, you know the line, like the line, sometimes I feel like everybody's a sexy baby and I'm a monster on the hill. It's like, yeah, it's a silly line. It's silly, like everybody's a sexy baby and I'm the monster on the hill is a fucked up, very surreal, very sort of esoteric way to phrase that particular sentiment. But it's also like, yeah, you know, like the way that beauty is conceptualized in the public space is often very infantilizing. The way that people, especially celebrities, especially people in spheres of fame, are expected to behave is often very baby-like. It's often very this conspicuous preservation of performative innocence, which is something that Swift herself certainly has a lot of experience with, like this impetus to perform a certain kind of wholesome innocence always to everyone everywhere, as part of brand management, versus like she feels like she's a monster on the hill, that gets pierced through the heart but never killed. Is like, yeah, I can see why you would think that, Taylor. Also, you're a billionaire, so shut the fuck up a little bit. Shut the fuck up a little bit. Not entirely. Like, keep making music, but shut the fuck up about that a little bit, because, like, no, Taylor, baby, girl, honey, you're also a sexy baby. Come on. Like, I have seen the way you engage with your fans. Like, I don't follow you on Twitter or whatever, but, like, I've seen the parasocial shit that you get up to, and the way that your marketing machine presents you, and you don't get to sit there and be like, oh, everyone else is a sexy baby. You're that too, lady. But it's an amazing line. Like, it's an astute observation, I think. And it's certainly one that I can't get out of my fucking head. As well as, like, just the fucking chorus is memeable. It's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me, which is a feeling that's very universal. So yes, I have opinions about Taylor Swift's music. I have quite a lot of them. Not so much most of her discography, but like Folklore, Evermore, 1989, and Midnights are albums that I have engaged with and listened to critically. And I find that she's generally pretty good. Like, she's not vapid at all. She has something to say. She has a perspective. She has a politique, which is not a politics, but she also has politics, obviously. But she has a politique that I find compelling and interesting to listen to. So, yeah. Syandra, what's your idea or some ideas for the ideal Final Fantasy XIV villain given the context you have right now? Good question, because what the fuck do you even make... Because that's the problem with Realm Reborn, right? Is that the villains are the most tedious, boring motherfuckers on God's green earth, and there's nothing interesting about them. Which is like, the Ascians, they are for the darkness, which is evil, and we're for the light, which is good, and then light and dark, and then good triumph over because evil wants to do bad because it's dark, and evil wants bad things, but light wants good things, and then we're good friends, and we're friendships friends with who friend care about friend things, and then evil is lonely and monopolistic and is all that's one of the weaknesses of Final Fantasy XIV, is that the villain-hero conflict is just so profoundly, deeply lame. And, like, I feel like they kind of already got towards really good villains for 14 already, like Lolorito. And Telegia Delegi were very solid villains, especially Telegi. Like, that whole thing of, like, of him... Like, that's a good way to engage with the game's mechanics, too. Like that the battlegrounds, the PvP battlegrounds exist because the nation states are battling over control of the Omega weapon, right? Like, they have this formalized feud going on for control of this extremely powerful geopolitical tool, like this weapon of mass destruction, and then Teleji Adeleji using the idea of like, oh, well, I'm gonna build an orphanage for orphans by doing, like, he's using charity to launder his reputation and pull a smokescreen over his efforts to acquire, like, political power over this like, tool of geopolitical power. That is a really fucking solid villain motivation. I feel like Murder Pope, Thordan, little bit like he was a good villain for his storyline for Heavensward. I don't know that he would be a great sort of general overarching villain. That seems to be where they're casting the Asians still, right? Like the Asians are still heralds of the god of darkness, whom, as far as we know right now, is evil bad because of bad evil, and then good light has to do heroic friendship good light things, and then beat the evil dark bad because of otherwise Age of Darkness, and then evil bad thing happen because of something bad, right? That's sort of still where the narrative is right now, in the way that it's using the Asians as like this manipulating power behind the scenes that's like sort of trying to push everything in dark directions, which, as I gather, there's some kind of setup going on where it's like, but maybe sometimes light is bad? Maybe the light is not always good? Maybe Hydaelyn is like, maybe not an uncomplicated, like, maybe we don't stand. Seems to be where it's going. Which, like, yeah, okay, but I don't find that very interesting either, because, like, the sort of, but what if the light that you thought was good was, in fact, bad, actually? Is also not a very compelling twist, like, on its own. It depends on the context and the execution, obviously, but what would a good villain for, like, I feel like Teleji Adeleji and like, Lolorito are the most compelling villainous characters that I've encountered so far, because their villainy is so mundane. Like, they're not fighting for, like, the resurrection of the god of darkness or the balance of the universal powers. They don't have high-minded ideals like that. They are people who are in it for... Like, evil is banal, ultimately. Evil is banal. It is base, it is venal, and it is not that complicated. And I think so they are good villains on that front. And that's where Thordan is a pretty decent... Like, where he's a decent villain is that underneath all of his posturing about, like, the history of the world and, like, protecting the citizens of blah blah from the dragons and blah, like, underneath all of that nonsense, he just wants to be king. Like, he just wants to be in charge of everything. He just wants to be in power. What he wants is ultimately, fundamentally, deeply selfish and very banal, right? And I like the banality of evil especially as counterpoints to someone like the Warrior of Light, right? Like, who is so idealistic, who fights for these grand ideals that mean so much more than the individual person, and then the villain to that would be someone who's like, no, fuck ideals. I don't give a shit about ideals. I care about me. Me. I want this. I want power. I want money. I want influence. I want things to be my way. I want to control things. I want to take charge of things. I want to be in charge. I want to have power, right? Like that. I think that's a good counterpoint to the hyper idealistic chosen one perfect good guy that the Warrior of Light kind of is. So, like, I would go more towards Teleji Adeleji. I would go more towards Lolorito as like villain archetypes for Final Fantasy XIV, given the context that I have right now. Rosen Knight, if you could possess the powers of one Final Fantasy class, which would it be and why? Oh, White Mage, obviously. Like, do you know how much of a fucking lifesaver it would be to be able to cast Esuna on myself whenever I get sick? That, like, oh, my asthma attack, fuck that, Esuna. Boom, no more asthma. I want to be a White Mage. I want to have White Mage powers. Thank you, please. Fetoff, did you actually study or learn game design, or do you do it more as a hobby? Also, what's your favorite League skin line? I never have an answer to favorites questions. I don't have a favorite skin line, because I don't pick favorites. I'm terrible at it. I have different skin lines that I like for different reasons, but I guess Odyssey, if you really wanted the answer to that. But did you actually study or learn game design, or do you do it? I never studied game design, and I never comment on game design either. I'm not a game designer, and I don't make content about game design. I feel like you're asking about character design? more than game. I don't think you're asking me about game design because I don't think I've ever made content about game design ever. And as far as character design, like, did I actually study and learn it? Yeah, it was my job for like a decade. Like I was a professional artist for a long time. Like, not a high level one. Like, I was a commission artist. I was like one of the people who, if I had been doing it nowadays, I would be making like Twitch emotes and shit, and drawing people's Warrior of Lights probably for commissions, and like doing comics and shit. I was an illustrator, so that's where I studied it. I like, not for school, not at school, much. Like, I did a few animation classes here and there, but for the most part, I learned it by doing art and character design. So I assume that's what you were actually asking me about. Autistic Al, if you were somehow given the power to permanently change one thing in League of Legends, Legends of Runeterra lore, anything from tweaking a minor nitpick to declaring the entire western half of Runeterra doesn't exist, what part of the lore would you change? I mean, shit, like, there isn't one thing. Like, there isn't one thing I would change. There just isn't. Because, like, if it comes down to, like, one thing I would change, it's like, oh, delete Nocturne. Because he's useless. As he is now, you could remake him, you could give him a visual update into something that's more compelling, but with the existence of Fiddlesticks especially, he just doesn't fucking matter. Like, what's the fucking point of him at all? Or get rid of Shaco. Like, get rid of him entirely. Like, there's a bunch of champions who I don't feel like they serve any purpose, like Xin Xiao, for example, that I would just get rid of because they're extraneous. They're fluff. They are needless. Like, they don't add anything to the story. And they're sort of just distractions and dead weight around the necks of the game. There's a bunch of champions who I would argue for deleting or merging together into single champions. But I guess if I had to change one thing, I would just retcon away the Ruination. I wouldn't retcon out Viego, but just the whole Sentinels of Light event, everything that happened, like everything with Akshan and the revive gun, and the way that they resolved that, I would just have that not happen, please. Just everything that happened in the Sentinels of Light visual novel, I would just have that not happen, and instead have a Ruination that was good instead, like one that actually engages with the underlying themes and the storylines of the characters instead of barely paying. I fucking have Yorick be involved. The fucking entire crux of his entire fucking character arc, his fucking character is like, oh, he shows up and gives you a drop of holy water and tells the maiden to fuck off. Yeah, good job. Ooh, yeah, no, get rid of the Ruination event. Like, retcon it. Just make it so that it hasn't happened yet. I still keep Viego as the Ruined King. I like him. Viego, Isolde, the characters, all of that. But the Sentinels of Light and the Ruination event, let's just put that away. Just have the Ruination League of Legends Forge, like Riot Forge game, and then we haven't gotten to the part where Viego shows up to do Ruination to the whole world yet. Just lightly brush that out of existence. Keep the characters, keep Vex. Vex is fine. She probably shouldn't have been the crux of Viego's entire fucking plot. Like, I spread the Ruination all over the world with my Yordle powers. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, no, she fucking... Oh my god. Like, keep all the characters and stuff. That's fine. All the Sentinel characters that were introduced and, like, sort of became more characters in Legends of Runeterra. Absolutely keep them. Just don't... Not the Sentinels of Light event. Just that one can just go. Ronnie, what's your favorite boss from each of the Souls games you've played? Ah, boy. As I've said many times before, I can't pick favorites. I'm sorry, Ronnie. I don't have favorites. I just don't have them. I don't pick favorites. I can't decide on favorites. There aren't any. Because things are cool for different reasons. Like, the Bloodstarved Beast is interesting because it lends itself to such an interesting interpretation of the area that it's in. Like, it lends itself to such an interesting interpretation of beasthood and what humanity means in Bloodborne, right? But then you also get shit like Sif in the original Dark Souls, which is like the emotional whiplash that boss pulls on you by having Sif begin to limp and be kind of pathetic and tumble over like a dog that's been hurt and wounded, and like really sort of punching you in the gut with what you're actually doing is you're killing a fucking dog. That's amazing in its own right, but I don't know how to say that, that's better than the sort of weird emotional resonance of the Blood-Starved Beast. I don't know how to say that that's better than having like the waltz, like the dance that you play with Lady Maria in the clock tower when you have this very deliberate back and forth with her. I don't know that that's better than Vendrick, like the reveal of Vendrick when you realize, oh shit, he's gone hollow, fuck. Like my entire quest, everything's been leading up to this, and then okay, yeah, no, like the guy who was supposed to tell me how to beat the hollowing curse is hollow, shit. Like, I don't know how to pick favorites. They're all interesting for their own reasons. Like, they all have their own... Like, the Pursuer is a boss I feel like most people don't think much of in Dark Souls 2, but the way that it's a mirror to the player, like, it literally spawns into the world like an invader, right? Like, it's literally a mirror image of you, like, with a million weapons on its back that it doesn't use, that it's just collected, and trophies, and, like, swollen with souls. That's so cool. But for different reasons than why Vendrick is cool, for different reasons why the Blood-Starved Beast is cool, so I can't pick favorites. Varia the Villain. Oh, that's a good lord, that's a long one. Would you make a series about the character design of Final Fantasy, or at least the summons? I mean, yeah, like, for shorts, I might. That's a place to go, certainly. I probably could, but if you're talking about something on the main channel, maybe? Like, I might do What's the Deal videos, about some character. Like, I definitely do want to do a What's the Deal with Cloud Strife or Sephiroth, or both. Probably Sephiroth. Yeah, there's a good What's the Deal in Sephiroth. Like, I would do that, but a series about the characters on Final Fantasy is like, I don't have room in my schedule for new series right now. In case I get a million people asking me about Elden Ring, like, I get questions about Elden Ring pretty much every day, even though I've answered it a million times, and I'm so tired of answering it now, that I sort of don't reply to them anymore, because I'm working on it. I'll get there. Just please, like, from my perspective, it's like, hey, are you doing the thing? 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 And for me, it's like, I'm working on it. Like, I'm trying. I got shit going on. Like, I'm trying. For me, it's just stressful, you know. Anyway, the point of that is, I was acting there, by the way. I wasn't actually angry, just in case anyone thinks I'm actually being sort of, But, what was I trying to say? Right, I don't have room for a series on the main channel. I might do shorts. Let's see. Florent, would it be possible to gender swap Gnar? I would say no, primarily because Gnar really isn't gendered as a character. Like, he is a he. He's a boy. Like, he has he/him pronouns anyway when he's described, but he's not really a gendered character at all, I don't think. It's like, you change him into a girl and it changes. So, on the one hand, yes, it would be eminently possible because nothing changes. On the other hand, you wouldn't be able to gender swap him because if you gender swap him, nothing changes, right? So you haven't done anything. You could say he's non-binary. You could say that he's agender. You could say that he's she, they, neopronouns. Like, you could change him into any gender, but it doesn't change anything about the character. Like, the character doesn't have any part of them that I feel is gendered. So yes and no, I guess. Variasis, in this first quarter of 2023, is the one piece of media that you really liked a lot. Can be anything from a game to a book to music and everything in between. I have gone back to Final Fantasy VII a couple of times. The remake, Final Fantasy VII remake. A couple of times, which was sort of a nice stress relief. I don't think I can think of, like, any one thing that's sort of really been grabbing me in the first quarter. because I've been bouncing all over the place. Like I've gone back to Final Fantasy VII Remake a couple of times, in part as research for a video that's going to come out on the channel soon. But I can't think of like one thing that came out that sort of really grabbed me. I've just been looking forward to Tears of the Kingdom, really, and Final Fantasy 16. I guess 14, Final Fantasy 14. Like I streamed a lot of that here in the start of the year, and that's really been I've liked that a lot. Although, admittedly, what I've liked about that is probably more so the stream community that's grown up around it, more than the actual game. Red Lemon, extremely random, so feel free to skip. What's a Scandinavian thing, folklore, story, person, invention, location, anything that you think would make an interesting core concept for a Pokemon design? Oh, Nissa. So, house elves, essentially. Not in the fucking Harry Potter sense at all, but Nissa are house spirits, essentially. Like more like gremlins, almost. They live, especially in farmhouses and stuff, like especially on farms, they just are there and they help take care of things. They help feed the animals. They help make sure that they don't get illness or disease. They help make sure that the harvest goes well. And in return for that, you leave out food for them, especially bowls of porridge, especially bowls of sweet milk porridge with lots of sugar, like really generous bowls of porridge, and to keep them happy and to show your appreciation for all the help that they do around the house and the farm. Fail to do that, and they will strike you with all kinds of curses, like anything from bad luck, where you just trip over stuff and things fall off the shelves, to you get struck down with plague and die. But they are like a really, really deep, old folkloric part of Danish culture. Like they're also like they're Scandinavian. Like they're also in Norway. They're called tomter, I think. I think maybe is that Swedish? I can't remember. But yeah, no, that would make a great concept for a Pokemon design. Like you'd have to change them into some sort of an animal. I don't want another Mr. Mime situation on my hands, but there's definitely a little gremlin creature, Nissa inspired little thing. There would definitely be something to that. Mosekon is also a good one. That's the bog wife. You know, in the mornings when you walk out over like a agricultural field or something, and like there's mist sort of just hanging there, low to the ground, just sort of floating over the grass and the stalks. That is in Danish. That's Mosekonbrygger. That is the bog wife is brewing. She's a witch at her cauldron, like stirring it and brewing her strange potions and spells. And the mist and the steam from all of that is pouring out over the fields and rendering everything misty and cold and wet. And obviously, you don't want to run afoul of her. Like you don't want to mess with her. You don't want to go into the bogs alone, because she will grab you and drag you down to the depths and drown you and eat you. But also, occasionally, someone might go to her for a potion or some magic or some help for a fairy tale thing, and she too would make it compelling. Like you could use that as a thing to build a character around. Trolle, like trolls, like Scandinavian trolls specifically, which are already creatures like sort of like these big rotund creatures that are sort of sometimes made of stone, sometimes they're elemental, like they're made of wood or stone, or like the hills. Sometimes they're the size of a hill, sometimes they're the size of mountains, sometimes they're the size of a thumb, with their bushy tails and like big noses. Like they would make compelling Pokemon designs, absolutely. Lablast 2882, Hades question: is there a character design in Hades that you think missed the mark or just didn't work that well? Yes and no. I think sort of yes and no. I really do think that Dionysus doesn't make sense as a jacked gym bro. Like I don't think it makes sense for Dionysus to be jacked. Like specifically in the way that like a bodybuilder is jacked, right? Like it doesn't make sense for him because he's an indulgent hedonist. It makes sense for him, like he can be buff, absolutely, but he should be thick, like, or just not have the thing he shouldn't have is a jacked body, because that implies strict self-discipline, that implies like very like controlled eating, that implies like cutting at the right times, that implies getting up at 6 a.m. every day to go to the gym and do like for 2 hours, and then go to work and then come back and home and then another 2 hours in the gym before like that implies a very strict, regimented, very un-Dionysian lifestyle, right? Like, because he's a hedonist, he's a good time boy, he's a slutty himbo, right? Like, I don't think he's the kind of dude who who only eats like low carb, high fat, protein rich muscle building meals, and like, I don't think he does that kind of lifestyle. I don't think he does that. It makes sense for Ares, like perfect sense for Ares, for example, to be that way because he's Mr. Military guy. He is a fucking gym rat. Like, that makes perfect sense for him. He's the guy who does military drills all the time and like is training and is harsh and disciplined and shit. Makes sense. Not so much for Dionysus. Like, I don't think making him so jacked and so buff as he is, I don't think it makes sense for the character. Seth the Seal, what's your opinion on powder monkeys in Legends of Runeterra? Don't think I have much of one. Like, I think it's a cute little pun, powder monkeys. Like, yeah, because that, I may be misremembering something here, but I believe powder monkeys were, like, actually slang for real children whose job it was on ships to collect powder. Like, to collect ammunition, to collect black powder for the cannons. I may be wrong about that. Like, that might be a sort of mistaken folk mythology kind of thing. But I like them as they're cute little designs, but outside of that, they're not. I don't have strong opinions on them. Soulstep, have you told your family what your job is yet? I've tried. Like, it's more that they don't really understand what the job is, even though I've told them. They know I'm a YouTuber. They know that that's what I do. I think they've watched some of my videos here and there, or at least poked in and peeked at what I'm doing, but none of them engage with YouTube, really. Like my sister is like a year younger than me, and she's also obviously online, but she's much more on Instagram Reels and TikTok. And she doesn't really have favorite YouTubers. She doesn't really watch that many video essays, as far as I know. I think she follows some beauty tubers and stuff, but like, in terms of what my specific job is and what it entails, it's not really something they understand. Like, my nephew is probably the closest to understanding, because he has a bunch of YouTubers that he watches. But no, for the most part, they're just not really into that area of online content, so they just kind of don't really know the job. Koalada, if you could make one specialty product that's usually hard to find in your average store, readily available for purchase for you at all times, what product would it be? I have no idea. I can't think of anything. Specialty, like, I've never had the money to develop any kind of taste in niche specialty products. Yeah. I can't think of anything that I would be like... I'm just sitting here with my head, like, I literally put my hand under my chin and looked up wistfully into the air, trying to imagine. No, I don't know. I think that's my honest answer to that question, is I have no idea. Hitmonkey. In the miserable scenario that you cannot keep rats as pets, what would be your alternative choice? That would be a cat. 2 cats, actually. I wouldn't want just one. 2 cats would be the perfect pet. That's the pet I want. Next, after rats, is a cat. 2 cats. Maybe more cats. Lots of cats. I want cats. Farley, do you have any history shows or YouTube channels that you enjoy? Not really. Not specifically. Like, I follow plenty of channels that'll sometimes post history content. Like, but I don't really have, like, history YouTubers that I follow. Like, I guess, actually, wait. The Exploration is a good YouTube channel that does... he does history, but he does a lot of political history. He does a lot of, like he does a lot of sort of broader history of politics stuff. Jonas Saika, CCK Philosophy, has a really great series about the German Revolution that I found quite interesting. Honest opinions on the Fairy Court cinematic, it's boring. There's nothing fucking happens in it. It's just here's a pretty character looking pretty in the pretty environment, and here's a pretty character looking pretty in the pretty environment. He's a pretty character looking pretty in the pretty. Here's a pretty character looking pretty. Thing. Oh no! Ooh, is the ominous of the character? Ooh, they're coveting the throne, and then the trailer ends. There's nothing there. That's why I didn't do a video analyzing the animation. There's no point. The animation barely communicates anything. It's just about showing off the characters are pretty. Here's them looking pretty in pretty environments, and that's fair. That's fine. That's fair enough. Like, it's just there's nothing for me to engage with there. Are there any intros to cinematics in general that you enjoy that you've not played the games for, or aren't the genre that you're interested in? What appeals most about? I guess the World of Warcraft trailers would qualify for that, because I've really enjoyed, like, when World of Warcraft puts out cinematic, like, when Blizzard puts out any cinematic for anything, it's obviously a big fucking deal. Like, I don't play Overwatch. Like, I tried, but I could never get into it. But the cinematics for Overwatch, the trailers, like, when Blizzard still allowed them to spend money on shit that wasn't esports, oh, fuck yeah. Like, man, damn, the animation quality in those. Like, the animators that work for Blizzard, I still cry at The Last Bastion. Absolutely fucking hell. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. Like, I've watched plenty of trailers for games I haven't played, but I don't know that there's any, like, I would sort of single out that would sort of, oh, this really appeals to me, kind of like, nah, not really. Let's see. What started your love of rats, and what advice would you have for a first-time rat owner? Oh, a lot. A lot. Like, rats, we settled on rats as pets mostly because we weren't allowed to have anything bigger than that. Like, it was rats or guinea pigs or, like, some small caged critter of some kind was, like, the most that we could get away with in the apartment we were living in at the time. And so rats were just, like, we're not really because we were so, like, really in love with rats specifically. It was because, oh, okay, this is a pet that we can have under our current conditions. And then, like, over time, of course, I fell deeply, deeply in love with them. But mostly it's just, yeah, they're small, they're cute, they're social animals. Sure, why not? So there was no, I don't have a compelling story about why I chose to have rats. But the advice I would have for a first-time rat owner is get ready for heartbreak, because you get a year where you're pretty much safe. And after a year and a half, you have to be ready for the idea that you'll have to say goodbye any day. They could just, something can happen. They could have a heart attack. There could be a nerve damage. Like, one of our rats, we found her one day inside, like, one of the little sort of plastic tubes that they climb around in, dragging her legs behind her, because presumably, I mean, it's hard to tell, but presumably she had a blood clot that got trapped in her spine and disabled her from the waist down. And that was just one day to the other, right? Like, that's shit that can happen. It happens a lot less. That I guess that would be the advice. Get rats from a reputable breeder. Like, do your research, find a breeder who knows what the fuck they're doing, was diligent about keeping family lineages, who has experience, and who breeds for health and for fitness, not just for the aesthetics, but who breeds for health and temperament. Because, like, never, ever, 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 if you can avoid it, buy a rat from a pet store. Like, unless the pet store gets them from a reputable breeder, and you should ask about that, don't do it. Because pet store rats tend to be horribly inbred, because they're usually bred as fodder. They're bred as food for snakes and like other cage animals like that, which I think is profoundly cruel. And they tend to be inbred. They don't tend to be well cared for. They have fungal infections in their lungs. They have all kinds of shit going on. Don't do it, because that's when you'll learn that lesson very quickly, that you might find them dead in the cage one morning for some fucking reason that you have no way of knowing. And you can't save them, because they won't respond to medical treatment, because their genetics are so fucked. So get rats from a reputable breeder, for the love of God. And if you can't do that, if you have adopted some rats from somewhere where you don't know their lineage or whatever, be ready for the heartbreak, because it's gonna come. And if you're not ready for it, it can put you off trying, like, getting new rats and trying again. Which is what I think you should do, because they're worth it. They are worth it. It's just, you get a year. At most, you get 3. If you're very lucky, you get 3. Most of the time, you don't. And then it's time to say goodbye, and it hurts every single fucking goddamn time. And you have to be ready for that. You can't go into this without that knowledge in your head that this is going to be very temporary from your perspective. It's going to be their entire lives, but it's not going to be that long for you. And it's painful every single time. It's worth it, but it's painful. Anyway, current favorite track of music to listen to while working. I don't usually listen to music while I work. It depends a little bit on the kind of work that I do, but if I'm script writing, I can't listen to music. It distracts me. I cannot have sound in my ear, especially nothing with lyrics. I might listen to... Actually, I have a track. It's called Weightless by Marconi Union, and it's a completely ambient, sort of like very ambient, very mellow, very sort of floaty kind of track with absolutely nothing going on in it. Like, there's no movements, there's no anything, there's nothing to distract me. It's just sort of white noise, but much nicer and prettier. But that's the thing I usually listen to while I'm trying to work on a script, is like brown noise. Smooth brown noise to just sort of mask out and block all other sounds in the environment so I can focus. That's usually when I'm working, that's what I'm doing. Ellie, if you could give one comic book or comic your dream cinematic or television adaptation, what book or comic would it be? I wouldn't, actually. No. I don't think I like, because like most of the work that I really like, books and comics, most of those that I really like, that I really think are great, that I really enjoy, that I really love, it's because they are books and comics. Like, it's because, like, something like Watchmen, for example. Like, Zack Snyder did an adaptation and it sucked, I think. But... And it worked. The reason why Watchmen's good and the reason why it works is because it is a comic. Like, that's why it's good. It's because it works within the confines and within the limitations of the medium of comics to do the thing that it wants to do. So for me, like, the only benefit of an adaptation for me, really, is that it brings in a bigger audience. Like, I think stuff like Spider-Verse, Into the Spider-Verse, for example, technically that's an adaptation of the Spider-Verse comics. Like, there are sort of comics that are like Into the Spider-Verse kind of thing, except they're not. Like, none of that story, none of that plot, none of what's Into the Spider-Verse really does, like, is anywhere in the comics that it's adapted from at all. Like, the only thing it took from that is, there's lots of different multiverses with lots of different Spider-Mans in it. That's it. And all of the brilliance of that came from the fact that it was animation. It was a movie. It was an animated movie that took so much advantage of being animation, like, that used the medium of animation in such an interesting, innovative way, right? So, like, I wouldn't target anything that I like for adaptation because I like it for what it is. So I don't know that I'd want an adaptation. And yeah, that brings us all the way out to almost 2 hours. Jesus Christ. Oh, but that is the Patreon podcast for questions, supporters, YouTube membership, Twitch channel, donation, podcast, questions and answers QA. For March. That's the end of that. It is like half past midnight and I need to take a nap because I have a TTRPG game in not too long. For this month. And if you want to ask me questions for this thing, become a member of this YouTube channel that you're watching this on, or the Shorts channel, or Twitch subscriber, or donate to me on Ko-fi. Just make sure that you have your Discord linked to your Ko-fi account and make sure you have a Ko-fi account. Or Patreon or anything. Like, if you support me in any way ever, then you'll get access to the Discord and you can come ask me questions about these things if that's something you want to do. But yeah, hope you've enjoyed yourselves. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for supporting my nonsense and helping me do the nonsense that I do and make money doing it, which I continuously am convinced is some kind of miracle or Truman Show plot to deceive me in order to use my embarrassment for content or something. But, you know, I'm gonna ride this pony while it lasts. Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for sticking around. And I'll see you next month with more of all of this rambling.